Curiosity and certainty, fellow netizens, it's Bill. Today I am talking about the crucifixion and scholarship. I am particularly talking about the crucifixion of the founder of the Christian religion, Jesus of Nazareth, and the documentation therein within the sacred Christian scriptures. It's worth acknowledging, and I make no attempt to hide this, that I am an adherent of the Christian religion and have been my entire life. Furthermore, I'd also like to point out that all individuals within my family, both alive and dead, both immediate and extended, as far as I'm aware, would also actively and positively identify themselves as adherents to the Christian religion, as I am, at least at the time of recording. Now, let's talk about the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, crucifixion is a gruesome and barbaric form of capital punishment, often involving the fastening of the condemned and brutalized individuals to a vertical fixture where they remain until death. Death by crucifixion is, by design, very agonizing, very barbaric. Christians, such as myself, are obliged to subscribe themselves to the descriptions of the life of Jesus as documented in the sacred scriptures, otherwise known as the Bible, particularly within a subset therein known as the four canonical Gospels. A lack thereof in and of itself disqualifies you from being a Christian. In other words, if you don't acknowledge the crucifixion of Jesus, you're disqualified from being a Christian. It's also worth noting that even the most critical of secular scholarship would acknowledge the indisputability of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Furthermore, getting to the impetus for discussing the crucifixion, many of the Christian media sources I personally subscribe to are proliferating an analysis of an article from a popular Christian media source known as Christianity Today. This particular article was written by a man by the name of Daniel Sillman, who is the senior news editor for Christianity Today. The article was entitled, "Was Jesus Crucified with Nails?" In the title, there's also a question mark as well, just so y'all know. I'll put a link to this very particular article in the description. Essentially, the article is a critical analysis of the development and description of the crucifixion throughout antiquity, or at least of crucifixion in general. Furthermore, I was prompted to do my own research on the canonical accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. These accounts can be found within the sacred Christian scriptures, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 27, the Gospel of Mark chapter 15, the Gospel of Luke chapter 23, and the Gospel of John chapter 19. I was surprised when I found out that, in fact, none of the particular Gospels of Jesus' crucifixion describe the utilization of nails in respect to fastening Jesus to the cross, at least in the original documented languages, which are Greek. Now, if English is your only language of fluency, like me, and you read the Bible, you're probably reading it in English, as I do. I'd hedge a bet that you're probably going to be reading one of the following 12 translations that I'm about to list out: Christian Standard Bible, aka CSB, English Standard Version, ESV, King James Version, KJV, New American Bible, NAB, New American Standard Bible, NASB, New International Version, NIV, New International Reader's Version, NIRV, New King James Version, NKJV, New Living Translation, NLT, New Revised Standard Version, NRSV, The Message, MSG, The Passion Translation, TPT. I'm willing to bet that at least 90% of Christians, at least in the English-speaking world, are going to use one of the 12 Bible translations that I've listed. Side note, I find it interesting that all four of the previous canonical gospel citations, all of the versions listed, with the exception of NIRV, NLT, and TPT, withhold actively the descriptions of nails. While these three translations that I previously have listed, the NIRV, NLT, and TPT, actually do describe nails in their accounts of the crucifixion. There's almost something funny about that for those of you who are acquainted with the methodologies of translating the sacred scriptures. But that's a whole video for another day. However, things get interesting when you look at the Gospel of John, particularly in chapter 20. This portion of the sacred scriptures of Christianity is documenting the resurrection of Jesus and the immediate reaction of some of his followers. Like the crucifixion, Christians are obliged to subscribe themselves to the resurrection of Jesus, to belief therein as documented within the sacred scriptures, which means a lack of accepting the resurrection disqualifies you for being a Christian, just like a lack of affirming the crucifixion of Jesus as well. Getting back to John 20, it describes one of the followers of Jesus who was adamant that he examine the hands of the resurrected Jesus, and that he examined his hands for, depending on whatever translation you're looking at, the nail holes, nail marks, nail wounds, imprint of the nails, mark of the nails, print of the nails, or wound of the nails. All right? So it's also worth noting that an allegory utilizing parallel language can be found in the epistle, also known as Colossians chapter 2. So while the account of the crucifixion may not document the use of nails, at least when you're looking in the original language, the documentation of the resurrection in the Gospel of John and all those translations listed, and I'll go so far as to say every translation of the Bible in English explicitly does, at least in John 20. Getting back to Daniel Sillman, the man who wrote the original article, he wrote a follow-up article that, quote, apologized for what he got wrong, reporting an idiosyncratic view on how Jesus died, unquote. While he never explicitly denied the historicity of the crucifixion, let alone any particular mechanical descriptions therein, and let's get that clear, even in his original article, he never explicitly denied it, he at least understands that his original article gave room and manufactured consent for people who actively would deny the crucifixion, or who would at least try to undermine the credibility of the account therein from the sacred scriptures, and wanted to try to correct his actions after the fact, which is something that should be positively sanctioned. To my fellow netizens, certainty and curiosity.